Can Bitcoin break out of this downward trend? And continuous crypto trading is headed to the CME this spring. Hey everyone, I'm Jenny Horne and welcome back to Crypto Corner right here on Schwab Network. Joining me this week is Nate Peterson, Director of Derivatives Research and Strategy at the Schwab Center for Financial Research. Nate, as always, thanks for being here. We typically love to get your perspective on the technicals to kick things off, so walk us through what you are seeing from the charts.
Yeah, good morning, Jenny. Let's start with Bitcoin. We'll throw up the a weekly chart of Bitcoin here with the 100-day and 200-day simple moving averages. As we know, or as most that are involved in the crypto space, it has been, a bit of a disappointment here to see, just how big this drawdown here is in Bitcoin, roughly 50% from its high of last year, around 127,000. So one thing that I've noticed with the chart of Bitcoin is, that it is identified as a risk-on, risk-off asset still. And I say that because if you were to overlay the software ETF, IGV is the iShares ETF, and we know around software that's been significantly underperforming the market. There's been a lot of risk-off price action there within software due to AI disruption concerns. IGV is down 30 to 35%. It peaked last October. Bitcoin peaked last October. Bitcoin down about 50% or so. So that's number one. And then number two, we know that we're in that, fourth year of the halving cycle here, where this is generally a bearish year for Bitcoin based on its price history. So that tells me that until proven otherwise, the psychology around Bitcoin is that the sentiment tends to be bearish around this year of the cycle. Now, what is the good news if we were to look at the chart here? Well, on that 100-week moving average, of course, that looked to be support for a little bit at the 100-week moving average. We broke through that. But then on February 6th, this might have been a near-term capitulation. We hit basically 60,000 in Bitcoin. The relative strength index, which is a measure of momentum, got all the way down to 17. Where it bounced basically coincides with the 200-week moving average. And then we got a sharp reversal back to 70,000, essentially within 24 hours. So the good news is perhaps that does represent a near-term low that traders can trade against. And if you look on a more near-term basis, perhaps I'd maybe call 65,000 very near-term support and maybe 70,000 near-term resistance. So if you're a bull and looking at the chart here in Bitcoin, that 60K is, perhaps a level to trade against. If it were to breach below that, that would be bearish. But provided that holds up as support, if we can get some sideways consolidation, some stability in the price, this can help to heal some of the sentiment around Bitcoin. And then beyond that, beyond 70,000, which is I would call, R1, the first level of resistance, would be roughly 73 or 74,000. That was the prior all-time high before Trump took office, and that represents basically the breakout level. So those are the levels to watch here on a near-term trading basis. And then if you're also a trader in stocks and you're looking within the tech space, next week we've got Salesforce announcing on Wednesday along with NVIDIA. Have we capitulated within the software space and AI disruption? If we can get that sentiment to recover, perhaps that could also be good for the price of Bitcoin. Now, let's move over to the Ethereum chart here. And obviously, Ethereum, crypto prices amongst all the coins are highly correlated. Ethereum down about 60% from its highs. If you look at the February 6th low, that's roughly about 1750. So that would be your near-term line in the sand. We got to an RSI of 18. That's extremely oversold. And again, Ethereum here, maybe around 1875 near-term low, and 2050 would be its near-term trading range. But these tend to trade in tandem. But I think at this point in time, given just the velocity of this sell-off that we've seen here over the last 3 or 4 months, is that we'd like to see some consolidation and heal some of this near-term technical damage that we've seen in both Ethereum and Bitcoin.
So we've gotten also some interesting commentary from Goldman Sachs' CEO, David Solomon, regarding Bitcoin. This is really interesting because a once pretty famed skeptic now perhaps turning a corner.
Yeah, gradually, some of these large big banks are coming into the waters. And David Solomon said, hey, I have a little bit of Bitcoin, but I'm really in this basically wait and see type of a mode. And the reason he cites is regulation. And that makes sense because, it's only been really since, the Trump administration came into office that we've seen a lot of this bullish traction within the regulatory environment around, digital assets. And so it sounds like Solomon is basically waiting to get more clarity around that. Clarity, meaning the Clarity Act, we know back in January that, that kind of hit a snag. And we don't really have another date for the Senate to basically open that up for review. And so it's a little bit unclear just how long that's going to take to get some of that regulation to move through Congress. But that obviously would be bullish for Bitcoin. That's probably the biggest near-term potentially bullish catalyst that we could see for the crypto space. And then also, Jenny, I think that perhaps Solomon is in the wait and see mode on Bitcoin is because there's a little bit of an identity search that Bitcoin is going through in terms of what does it represent. I mean, Bitcoin has historically been this dollar debasement type of a trade. It's been correlated or tracked or compared to M2 money supply, the Fed's balance sheet, Fed policy, inflation expectations. And there has been some correlation with gold. And, historically, they said, hey, when gold is doing well, there's a bit of a lag, but Bitcoin will do well. Well, that correlation essentially broke last year. We've seen gold and silver just run off to new all-time highs, while Bitcoin, as we know, has been under pressure. And so I think that until we can get a clearer sense around what Bitcoin represents, and this will help kind of embed that bullish thesis, that psychology of what traders and investors can expect Bitcoin to represent. So a lot of that's going to have to do with regulation. Solomon acknowledges, though, of course, on the technological advancements of Web 3.0 and all the stable coins and tokenization. All of that's on track. It's just the regulation side that we need to get some clarity around.
Absolutely. And just before taping this, CME Group did announce 24/7 crypto futures and options are coming now in May. So what are your thoughts on this?
This is, I'd say a healthy development for the industry. CME is basically acknowledging, they said that client demand for risk management on their digital assets is basically at a record. There were, $3 trillion in notional value on their contracts in 2025, and their futures contracts in January are up 46% year over year. And so by, essentially it's subject to regulatory approval. But in May, if they can launch this, this just provides their, investor base, primarily institutional, if they're going into, the futures and options space. This allows them to manage exposure nearly around the clock. There is a 2-hour window of maintenance they acknowledge that would need to take place. But if you think about the retail investor, if they're involved, let's just say solely in the ETF crypto products like Bitcoin or Ethereum, there's a limited amount of trading that you can trade these types of ETPs, exchange traded products. There's market hours, there's extended trading, but then there's a gap between when you close, so to speak, extended trading, and then you reopen the next day. So having these types of products on the market could potentially just allow more flexibility in managing exposure, also on the retail side. So this is a good development and acknowledgement that there is interest in the space around digital assets.
Absolutely. And I definitely think despite the recent weakness we've seen, there will be a lot of further developments and I'm sure some further volatility to keep on our radar. But appreciate it, Nate Peterson. Time to wrap things up here on Crypto Corner. But don't forget, subscribe to the Schwab Network YouTube channel to get the latest market commentary and a whole lot more. I'm Jenny Horne. Have a great week.